Hello, everyone who's joining us today, as well as those of you who are joining us online. My name is Meredith Lovell-Johnston. I'm the Chair of Graduate Studies in the Faculty of Education. We're joined today here with a number of our students from Doctoral Seminar 1 and Doctoral Seminar 2, and a few guests from the university. And I know that we have some guests from Brock and Windsor and Lakehead who are joining us remotely today. So today we have a talk by Dr. Paulo Granata. I pronounced that correctly?
Perfect.
Okay. Who's going to talk to us today about his exciting work in the area of AI in education. So that's going to be really exciting. And I was also reminded to let everyone know to check the board about the social. So what I've done since we actually have the pleasure of Dr. Michael Hooksman, who actually was the one who suggested you to us and is familiar with your work. Here with us today, I've asked him to do a brief introduction, and then we'll have the talk. I'm told we'll have a short break in the middle, and then questions at the end. So those of you who are online on Zoom, I'm also going to be moderating the chat on Zoom. So if your questions are there and you want to type them in, then I'll make sure that they're asked aloud in the question period.
Super. Well, Paulo, it's my great pleasure to introduce Paulo Granata to students of the doctoral program, to faculty and others who have gathered here today for this, quite important lecture about something that is troubling us, right? How are we going to contend with AI in education? Now, Dr. Granata has sort of feet in two different research cultures because he concluded his doctoral work and his early career in Italy, where Dr. Granata comes from. And he's now Associate Professor of Book and Media Studies at University of Toronto. Sitting, I would say, walking in the shadow of Marshall McLuhan and others. He's a person who specializes in an area called media ecologies. And the ecologies movement is the one where we look seriously at how cultures are impacted by various forms of codification or various forms of knowledge sharing. So let's say from an oral to a print culture to a media culture to a digital culture, and now to this crazy new frontiers. Dr. Granata is sort of following a lot in those, looking at the trails, seeing what's going on. And in that, he's had the opportunity to work with a terrific number of great scholars, say where he's centered at University of Toronto. There's really sort of a post-McLuhan world that he gets to travel in. Now, I follow him on Facebook, and following Dr. Granata on Facebook means going all over the place. I see how he takes his students on really interesting field trips. Silicon Valley, on the one hand, and then Italy. So on one hand, he'll be in these, the new metas and all that stuff at Silicon Valley. And then the next moment you see he's over in Italy in the workshop of a printer where books are being, created by hand. And so somewhere in that span, Dr. Granata is, zipping back and forth. But not only that, Dr. Granata is very much into virtual reality. And he's created in virtual reality several sort of classroom settings. And he takes students. I had the pleasure of visiting Paulo at his office at University of Toronto. Well, there's a whole set of VR headsets in a corner, as well as a ping pong table. He's got a way of trying to make this all fun. And in fact, you said to me something. You said, today, content doesn't matter, context does. And if I can teach in a manner where people have an experience, they will remember it, and hence they will learn, right? So I could carry on, and I don't think I'm fully done because there's a lot to say about some of the accomplishments, the various publications, et cetera. But really, the day is yours, and I think this will suffice as an introduction. Welcome to Aurelia. Welcome to Lakehead University. Welcome to the Tri-Doctoral University Program. And I look forward to hearing what you have to say today.
All right. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, Michael, for this kind of words. I'm really delighted to be here. I'm really delighted by this presentation. So thank you. It's a great pleasure. And today we're finally meeting. I'm very excited. And yes, I'm Italian, 100% Italian. That's why I speak English with a perfect Italian accent. And oh, I forgot to say hi to those who are watching online on Zoom. So bye, and we will engage in Q&A, right? So there will be an opportunity to interact with those on Zoom in a Q&A session. And so it's wonderful. And absolutely, let's get started. Well, I'm from Bologna. I've been teaching 15 years at the University of Bologna, and I do have a slide from the University of Bologna. Here it is. This is the University of Bologna in the medieval ages, in the medieval times. So it was founded back in the medieval ages. And I like to start with this slide. So this picture speaks, right, to the extent of conservatism in education. So after so many centuries, we still have a professor standing on the podium, talking and speaking all the time. You see the best students in the first row, as usual, right? And a student with a weird hat here. There are a couple of students whispering on top, usually making some noise. And yeah, I think you got it. You got it. The student taking a nap right on the right bottom. So nothing changed in centuries. Nothing changed. We still have the same podium, the same desks. And so the story of the education is one of conformity rather than a change. Let's say conservatism rather than disruption. However, if we look carefully at this very picture, representation of the medieval university, we see a central and very important element. Not the weird hat of this lady. The book. Michael was mentioning the book and media studies. The book. The book has been and is still today the main interface of knowledge. You still have, hopefully, some books on your desks. And as Marshall McLuhan used to say, the book is a teaching machine, an interface of knowledge, an interface for accessing, sharing, and creating new knowledge. So for centuries, the book has been the main interface of knowledge. A teaching machine, but in the tradition of the media ecology that was mentioned, it's not just a teaching machine. The book and many other technologies of knowledge is a thinking machine. We think differently because we use those kind of technologies. That's why the field of educational technology is so important, because it's a way to reimagine how we think, how we may think. These are thinking technologies, not just teaching technologies. And there's a lot of difference. And also, the book has been essentially shaping the whole, let's say, epistemology. Epistemology is a tricky word, but put simply, it means the way we know what we know. How do we know what we know? The epistemology. And the book has been informing our epistemology, the way we know what we know, for centuries now. And also, the book has created, let's say, the knowledge ecosystem we still live in today, and facilitated a sort of collective intelligence. After all, what we know is what other people knew before us, and they were able to preserve that knowledge. So we are benefiting from this preservation of knowledge. That's why conservatism is important in education, after all, because we preserve knowledge. And by the way, that's why music conservatories are called conservatories, because they conserve, they preserve, right, this kind of tradition. And so the book has been the main interface of knowledge for so many centuries now, informing our collective intelligence and impacting the way, not only the way we teach, the way we learn, but the way we think. This is the entire history of technology, we can put this way. And the book, of course, had a special momentum. This is a manuscript book. And by the way, students used to copy their own books. So the professor used to read aloud. That's why we call it a lecturer. So lecture means reading. Reading allows students diligently copying all the lectures, and then sharing, creating, disseminating knowledge. So now the book had a special momentum with Gutenberg. Johannes Gutenberg. So let's say that the printing press came to Europe. It was already prototyped in China and Korea, but eventually, as we know, the printing press, late 15th century, essentially was invented in Mainz in Germany by this gentleman, Johannes Gutenberg. And so the good and old Marshall McLuhan used to define the modern age as the Gutenberg age. Why Gutenberg age? Because the book was not just an interface of knowledge, was not just a thinking machine. The book was able to inform the overall set of attitudes, the mindset of the modern age, a set of attitudes, a set of knowledge, and again, the collective intelligence of the modern age. And this is particularly meaningful to note that you see it right on top here. At the very beginning, the printing press technology was called Ars Artificialiter Scribendi. That in Latin means the art of artificial writing. Art of artificial writing. Today we call it artificial intelligence. Already at that time they understood that, again, they were able to mechanize the process of writing. So that technology could externalize, outsource the very process of writing. Now we are on a next level where artificial intelligence is the new printing press. And if we stick with Marshall McLuhan's definition of the Gutenberg age, so now we are moving from the Gutenberg age to the Turing age. Alan Turing being, of course, one of the most important, if not the founding father of artificial intelligence. The Turing galaxy, with AI as a new interface of knowledge, changing our relationship, not just with learning, not just with knowledge, generally speaking, but changing our relationship with thinking. Not just a teaching machine, a thinking machine. And so a new form of collective intelligence. We are taking advantage the collective intelligence generated so far in the mostly book culture and digital culture. And now AI is providing us a new way, a new interface to access, share, disseminate, and create new knowledge. This is a fundamental historical moment. The shift, I like to call it, from the Gutenberg galaxy to the Turing galaxy. And in fact, Marshall McLuhan said something that is very relevant to understand this particular momentum. Any new technology tends to create a new human environment. Any new technology is not, again, just a tool, an instrument, a means. It creates an environment we live in. This is a core assumption of the media ecology intellectual tradition. A new environment, an ecological vision, a new ecosystem. So any new technology. And so, same as the book for centuries, AI now is creating a new environment. We live in a new environment. AI, again, not just as a tool, not just as a service, not just as a product, but as an environment, an infrastructure. Again, in the traditional media ecology, in the Canadian communication history tradition, Harold Innes worked on the idea of infrastructures, and communication is an infrastructure. And so AI is the new infrastructure, a knowledge ecosystem that is opening up endless possibilities. That's my main assumption. AI is creating the new environment we live in. And I'll give you some practical examples. So let's firstly reflect on the fact that AI is everywhere, ubiquitous. It's already everywhere. Let's say is the steam engine of the contemporary age. It runs pretty much everything in the industry, in the workforce. So you have examples already that show us how AI is everywhere. But even from a more practical perspective, so in our daily life, smartphone, assistance, transportation, online shopping, entertainment, the online recommendations for social media or platforms of all kinds are essentially based on AI. So it's the environment we live in. And sometimes we take it for granted, like the fish in the water. Marshall McLuhan, in fact, he used to say the fish is not aware of the water they live in. And so raising awareness is fundamental. We live in a new environment, and AI is shaping the environment we live in. And I wanted to give another example. So speaking of recommendations, I do search up on Amazon for some books. By the way, this is a very good book, Teaching with AI. I'll have some suggestions for you and recommendations from Amazon. Recommendations from Netflix on which series to watch next based on my views. Essentially, we think you will love this. And then eventually, of course, we know Google's recommendation. I did the Google screenshot in anonymous tablet, so it's not affected by my own choice. This is pretty much neutral. And you see AI and then, by the way, education is in the third position. So why this is relevant? It's something we know that AI is very good at predicting because of the algorithms, because they learn what we do, they can predict what we do. And so they can recommend what we do. And so they can influence our choices based on the so-called the choice paradox. The more choices we have, the less confident we are. When you go to the restaurant and the servers start listing all the possible options, we get confused. And then eventually they say, oh, but I have a brand new dish or has just arrived from the butcher, one specific piece of lamb. Then you get more confident to choose that one. So many choices, we are less confident. That's why the predicting algorithms are a kind of self-prediction. They are able to influence our choices. Sometimes we are not aware that while matching what we love, those kind of recommendations are affecting our choices, are channeling, directing, influencing our choices. And this is, again, invisible. We take it for granted. We like receiving those kind of recommendations, and sometimes they get it, but we become more lazy. Too many choices, less confidence. And so this is an example of how the things we create deeply influence our life, our way of living, and the current human affairs. And speaking again of Marshall McLuhan, Michael was mentioning when I take my students to Silicon Valley, this is in Silicon Valley, actually. In Palo Alto, there is a computer history museum. At the Computer History Museum in Palo Alto, you will find a quote from Marshall McLuhan. So this is me with my students, and the quote says, we shape our tools, and our tools shape us. So we create the conditions that eventually condition us. It's a mutual, recursive process. We create the conditions that condition us. This is where Marshall McLuhan said technologies are extensions, right? We extend our humanity in the environment we create, and then eventually the environment we create affects the way we live. And this is a core media ecological concept to understand how all technologies and environments affect the way we live. Even this very room is affecting the way you are learning now, or the campus, or the city. If you move in a big city, the big metropolis will provide you with a new environment. This is fundamental to understand the invisible influence of the environment we live in. And this is even more important with the environment that AI is creating now for us. And there's a lot of discussion on how AI, we call it artificial intelligence, right? So how AI is going to emulate, replicate the human intelligence, right? There's a big discussion on this. Actually, the big development, the recent developments in AI were possible because they gave up on the idea of replicating the human intelligence, and they created a new way to process language from a statistical perspective without necessarily emulating the human intelligence, but emulating language. I'll tell you more about this. And so the question is not just whether or not AI will reach or surpass the human intelligence. The question is, and that is fundamental for the field of education, the question is the impact of AI on the human intelligence. How AI is going to affect, change, modify the way we think. We shape our tools and our tools shape us. The impact on the way we think, on the way we live, the impact on the way we learn or teach. This is the crucial fundamental question. And the field of education and technology can help us understanding this kind of evolution in the human mind. Because eventually, the human species did not evolve biologically. We are 99% the same individuals of our ancestors, Homo sapiens, and 99% of DNA shared with the animal kingdoms in our ancestor descents. So the humanity evolved socially, culturally, by the means of technologies. We were able to extend our humanity in the technology we created. And so we were able to evolve even from a cognitive perspective. For instance, language has been the first artificial intelligence. I like to call language as a primordial artificial intelligence, because essentially by language we were able to better abstract things, to foster symbolic thinking, to foster a more diverse way of thinking. And so language then eventually was integrated into writing, because media or technologies of knowledge do not replace each other. They co-evolve, they integrate each other. And so in fact, writing integrated language. And then the printing press included writing. And then the actual computer culture integrated the print culture. And the World Wide Web eventually integrated the digital computer culture. And in fact, now, how those large language models are built by putting together the whole internet. Once again, all the medium is the content of a new medium. And so there is this kind of evolution that impacts the way, not just the way we access information, retrieve information, or manipulate or disseminate information. It's changing our relationship to knowledge and changing our relationship to thinking. In the same way, language enabled us to think in a different way, or writing enabled us a more linear way of thinking. And again, in the tradition of the Toronto School of Communication, Eric Havelock explained how the rise of the phonetic alphabet enabled over the centuries a brand new way of thinking. So now we are experiencing the same kind of media evolution, where the most important evolution happens in our cognitive functions, in the way we exercise, in the way we think. And as we may think, it was right at the beginning of even in the, let's say, the computer culture, Vannevar Bush, who started conceptualizing a kind of hypertext with a connected information and a kind of machine able to, Memex it was called, able to retrieve and connect informations of all kinds, as we may think. So technologies give us a possibility to think in a different way, to change our relationship with thinking. That's why, coming back to the founder of artificial intelligence, Alan Turing, with a wonderful interpretation of Benedict Cumberbatch, Alan Turing started asking, can machines think? That's why eventually the famous Turing test, not actually called imitation game, essentially Turing gave up with the idea of defining intelligence. It's such a hard task. And even defining thinking, how machines can think, but how do you define thinking? And so a simple way to describe this kind of interaction human-machine is to focus on dialogue and conversation. The conversational ability as a way to measure the extent of thinking, let's say thinking, the extent of thinking in the machines. How the machine is able to imitate, that's why imitation game, to emulate, imitate the human thinking, the conversational ability. Why this is so profound as an insight? Not by chance, it became the famous Turing test. Why it's so profound? Because the conversational ability goes straight to the very core of our humanness, of our humanity. At the beginning, in the beginning was the word. The language as the operative system of humankind. We are hacking now, in the moment we are living, it's an historical moment. We are really entering the operative system of humankind, language. One of the things that make us human, because language is not just communication, language is symbolic thinking. Without language, human intelligence would have been confined within the objective reality. With language, we can step out of the objective reality, because language does not just describe the reality we live in. Language enables us to create new realities, to create the world we live in. I'll give you an example. If I say, don't think of an elephant, we are actually thinking of an elephant. Okay, that's an easy trick. But if I say, think of a blue elephant in Aurelia, it's there in your mind. Just those few words enabled you to generate a blue elephant in Aurelia. Have you ever seen a blue elephant in Aurelia? No, I've never seen a blue elephant at all. But that's the power of language, creating the reality we live in. And so stories, religions, arts, everything. Language, again, does not just describe the reality or does not just communicate our thoughts. Language creates our thoughts, creates the way we think. Those like me who are actually speaking not their mother tongue know how hard is this, because you start thinking and speaking in a different language, so thinking in a different way. This is fundamental. And McLuhan says something like, again, the language enables the intellect to detach itself from the vastly wider reality. We step out of the reality. We create new realities. We create worlds. That's why externalizing, outsourcing the human language, as we are doing now with the large language models, which is a specific, let's say, branch of deep learning, machine learning, and so AI, the fact that we are externalizing language. And this is happening for the first time in history. It never happened in the history of humankind that we are outsourcing the human language. Again, it's a historical moment. This is what I call the divorce of human cognition, the cognitive process, and the verbalization, the verbal expression. It's a divorce now. We're able to verbalize, so we created a machine that can verbalize without necessarily relying on human cognition. The divorce. And this is huge as a shift, as a change, which is sense-making, making sense of the world, not just of the language, and I'll give you an example shortly, is sense-making without necessarily understanding, or without necessarily, again, intelligence in a human sense. We'll be back to that. Again, the divorce is happening now. The machine learned to write. That's another reference to the tradition of the Toronto School. Eric Havelock, he was a British classicist, then came to Toronto. He started studying the influence of manuscript and writing into the Greek philosophy. It's not just that the muse learns to write, it's the machine learns to write. Human language is no longer a solely prerogative of the human beings. Language is now outsourced, externalized. There's no need to think to verbalize. We don't need to think to verbalize. So, this is an historical moment. We are creating those machines, another reference to the tradition of media ecology, domesticating the machine. And my point is that by externalizing language, by outsourcing the human language, the operative system of our species, we are now stepping even further to a comprehension and understanding of the world. Because we understand, create, and make sense of the world by the means of language. Of course, along with our senses. But the way we created knowledge, we disseminated knowledge, we learn, we teach, and so on, it's all about based on language. So, the question is no longer whether or not machines can think, but how we can think with machines, how we can think with AI. That's the fundamental question, I think, particularly in the field of education, in the field of learning, and AI as a technology of knowledge. We are actually living at this, I call it an epistemic shift. Remember epistemology, the way we know what we know. The way we know what we know is fundamentally changing, transforming day after day. The learning environment is changing. And there is one moment of illumination that I think we all realized that things were really changing. And it was this moment, November 2022, OpenAI launched ChatGPT. GPT was already developed back in 2018. GPT-1, GPT-2 were already there. But in November 2022, we realized that something was really changed. What was the shock was to being able to engage in conversation with a machine. A fundamental change. So just to reflect on this, again, ChatGPT took the world by storm. In only 5 days, it reached 1 million users, while it took months, if not years, to other digital platforms to reach the same amount of users. Again, took the world by storm. And there's another moment that really gives us the extent of disruption that could cause, particularly in the field of education. See the Atlantic, December the 6th, so really a few days after the launch of ChatGPT. The colleges say is that. That's really is a photography of those changes. Nothing new, however, nothing new. Some of your parents may remember that back in the 70s, the same kind of disruption happened in the field of education, particularly in the math classes, with teachers starting protesting against the use of calculators. So fortunately, education moves forward. So it happened the same with ChatGPT at the very beginning, early 2023, with the universities banning and so far and so on, until even professors realized that they could use ChatGPT to write reference letters, right? So we realized that that was going to change everything. The old narrative, which is a kind of misleading narrative of the job replacement, that was very theoretical, it became very practical. Oh, I'm going to lose my job, or this is going to impact the job. Let's do a quick test for a bit of interaction. I'll show you some statements so you can, well, express with your facial expressions or somehow with your smile and so on, the extent of agree or disagree on those statements. AI will eliminate many jobs. I like your, okay, moderately undecided or moderately yes, all right. AI will create new jobs. Yes, almost, we are almost, I think, on the strongly agree with you. AI will change every job. Almost every job, almost every job. Another fundamental question. We are all to be asked to do more and better work more quickly. Right? Someone said, oh yeah, we will have more time because we can do things quickly. I'm not entirely sure. But this is important. Again, overcoming the false narrative of job replacement. Another way of taking into this matter is that AI will not replace your job, but someone else using AI. So those who can collaborate, cooperate with AI, I'm not using the word using. Those who can cooperate and collaborate with AI will likely replace those who cannot, who are not able to cooperate and collaborate. Let's take this way. And there is something true here. And so the narrative of the robots stealing our job. But it's a bit concerning that the first time you actually sign up on ChatGPT, you're signing up on ChatGPT, so interacting with a robot, and they ask, are you a robot? That sounds really suspicious. And I mean, we humans now have to prove to machines that we are humans. I call it the Turing test in reverse. Granata test, you can call it Granata test. But it's a paradox. We need to prove that we are humans to a machine. How do you prove you are human? I thought that being human meaning taking care of others, and be respectful and loving and care of others. No, to prove that you are human, you have to select those tiles and the semaphore, right? And actually, if you select that little tiny piece of street light, you will fail. You will not pass the test. Actually, now you can pass the test because the more we do, the more they learn. This is not just a test, a Granata test to prove that you are human. This is a way to train those machines. So essentially, we do, they learn. However, if you know that you will fail the test if you click on this tile, what do? You don't click it, right? You just click on the other tiles. And that's another way that we are changing in response to those systems. If you don't click on the little tiny piece of semaphore, it means that we are aligning to what robots or algorithms actually require us to do. That's why the real risk is not that just robots will become like humans. The risk is the opposite, that we become like robots. We become lazy, influenced, that robots get smarter and we get dumber. Because we align to that homogeneity and conformity of the state of things. That's fundamental in education. I'll be back to the idea of uniformity and homogeneity that is so, so compelling in the field of education. But for now, that is fundamental. And the generative AI, let's say, along with ChatGPT and similar large language models, even text-to-image generators. I believe you are familiar with Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, DALL-E, and so on. So the generative AI was a shock. I like to use this frame. I don't know if you watched this movie, Her, but it was a shock. Why, again, November 2022, and thereafter, why we were shocked? A few reasons for that shock. Firstly, for the first time in history, we have met an entity capable of conversing with us. I know some of you tried with your cats or pets or maybe transcended entities to establish a dialogue, and some actually did it, but it's the first time in history we can engage in conversation with a non-human entity, with a machine, well, non-human, with an alien. Someone attempted with aliens, they didn't actually. But again, it's the first time we have met an entity capable of conversing with us. And that was a shock. Second shock, we discovered that those intelligent systems do not necessarily think like us. They are not human. And so they don't think like us. They can be more efficient in some tasks, a difference in some tasks. They also realize that we all realize that the human intelligence is not the only form of intelligence in this planet, right? If you love dogs and cats, you know that they are intelligent, but in a different way. And so the animal kingdom, and so other forms of systems that are manifesting intelligence, but in a different way. We were so arrogant, and still we are, to think that the human intelligence is the highest form of intelligence. I don't know any scientific law that can prove that the human intelligence is the highest form of intelligence. So that was a shock, realizing that those machines are manifesting a different form of intelligence, not human intelligence, a bit different. Similar, but also different. Third shock, we have lost the monopoly of human intelligence. Many traits that were so well distinguishing the human intelligence, even like creativity, empathy, are no longer entirely ours. We have lost that monopoly. AI systems are manifesting a high extent of creativity set in a certain phase. I'll tell you more about creativity. However, we have lost that monopoly. Fourth and final shock, we realized that there's no need to be intelligent to fulfill a certain goal. With zero intelligence, human intelligence, you can accomplish a task, writing a paper, doing things, and so far and so on. Not just using language. I'll give you an example. but with no human intelligence. Again, there's no need to think to verbalize. There's no need to think to achieve a certain task. That's why some jobs are at stake. Because again, there's no need to think to accomplish some certain goals. And so this is the shock, right? I call it the 4 fundamental shocks in generative AI. There's also, I was mentioning that kind of the anthropocentric arrogance of the human species in believing that our intelligence is the highest form of intelligence. This is something that is rooted into the history of artificial intelligence. Even to call it intelligence was a bit misleading. John McCarthy, when in 1955 proposed the very label artificial intelligence, he did regret, actually, because it was a misleading way to frame the idea of intelligence. However, the history of technology teaches us that for the lack of better words, we need to use old words to define new things. Cars were horseless carriages, right? This is, again, the anthropomorphism that is in the history of artificial intelligence as well. All the terms we use to define learning, hallucinations, all those verbs and terms are mostly humane, but that's a misleading way. At the moment, the artificial intelligence is in the summer season. Artificial intelligence is a field with winters and summers. Now we are in the summer, so in a development. And it's important to understand that the large language models, mostly ChatGPT and generative AI, are just one specific kind of artificial intelligence. And it's important to know that the large language models are now multimodal. So they are turning different expressive forms, so images, music, sound, into language. That's why it's just not a tool to manipulate and create a language, but essentially it's multimodal. So they can be applied to any expressive form. Turning, using numbers, essentially they can apply the same rules we use for generating language to music, audio, images, and so far, and so on. So that's why the idea of how to define intelligence is fundamental. It's hard to define it. I'll stick with the educationist Jean Piaget. Intelligence is the way we deal with the unknown. What do we do when we don't know what we do? How do we face something that we don't know? And this is pretty much what the way even those language models have been trained. And how do we do? What do we do when we face a new situation? We rely on experience, we rely on the context, we transfer learning from one domain to another domain. We do some inference, what if, we have experience in what if situations, and we deal with something new. And in so doing, we can, again, face the unknown. This is precisely what we did, what they did, so researchers, when they started creating those large language models. So if I ask you the missing words, can you guess? Wikipedia is a free content online platform, website, encyclopedia. I'll give you 10. Reinforcement learning. This is how they did. If the computer guesses the right word, special prize. You were quite close, right? Platform, you get a smaller prize. This is why they call weights in the connections of between the different words related to the large language model. And so far and so on, written and maintained by by a community of people, authors, experts, I'm not sure. They are not paid. They're not paid. Volunteers. points. However, how you were able to guess the missing words? Because of the context. Context is more important than content. And to some extent, context makes us able to make sense of the content, right? That's why those systems have been trained to make sense of a larger context, to bridging the gap, to fulfill. Essentially, at the very beginning, they were employed just for improving translations. Then researchers realized, and so this is a quality that emerged unexpectedly. They were not expecting this kind of competency in generating language. They were just using the large language models to, again, improve translations. But by putting into the system a huge amount of text, eventually the qualities emerged. And so, by the way, so that's the whole thing. But what's the point now? By analyzing the context, you can bridge the gaps and fill in the blanks. Now, those systems are not just capable of bridging the gaps. They are capable of writing, as you know, new pieces of text of all kinds, answering questions, and so on. So essentially relying on language, we know that, but there is something more. And I'll show you. Let's make an experiment. I've been asking ChatGPT for what if, so what happens if my kids drop a glass full of water I put a type on purpose, so to confuse it a bit. What happens if my kids drop a glass full of water into a marble floor? Your question, humans. Your answer, humans. What happens? The water will spill everywhere. The glass. Yeah. Any other? What happens? The marble may crack. Okay. So, all right. What are you doing? This is very emphatic. What are you doing now? You are doing inference. You are transferring some experience and knowledge from one field to another field. Let's see what ChatGPT did. So I typed that question, and here we go. Firstly, it says it depends, it depends, it depends. Very rational. Glass breakage, you said that. Water spillage, you said that. Noise. Nobody thought about noise. Be honest. Potential injury. Damage to the floor, like she said. Cleanup required. Well, it didn't say that I will get very upset with my kids. That's very emphatic. But what is this? This is not a research paper. It's not a reference letter. This is an understanding of the world, the physical world we live in. A what-if situation related to an entire context that is not just linguistic, or better, by the means of the language, it can reconstruct the whole world. I did the same with Sonnet 3.5 by Anthropic, Claude, which is a similar large language model, and it's pretty much the same answer. Even more, with Gemini multimodal, like GPT-4, I just said, what happens if I open, this is even not my hand, so I just downloaded this picture from internet. What happens if I open my hand? I open my hand. And so the glass will drop and so far and so on. And you see the answer. I did this yesterday, the other day I went to Microsoft where one of my former students is doing an internship in the Microsoft HQ in Toronto. We took this picture and look. I said, well, tell me what you see, analyze it. people, two individuals. By the way, a younger male, so he knew that I was older. Then backdrop, CN Tower, Toronto, logo, Microsoft, context. I just skipped a couple of things. Then the relationship between the two. So now you know this is one of my former students at U of T. Look, colleagues, there may be co-workers, close, mentor and mentee, guest and host. He was hosting me there. Business partners, almost, because essentially we are working on a project together. And then he said family, but he said, you see, less likely. And so professional relationships is most plausible. An overall context, an overall understanding, a couple of slides to shock you a bit more, and then we take a break. Final thing, final experiment. No, this is something I didn't do, but it happens a few weeks ago, again at Anthropic, Claude. A needle in a haystack. It's an experiment researchers usually do to test the efficiency of a large language model. So essentially, the experiment, there's no need to read, otherwise you get confused. I do like my colleagues who put a lot of things in the slides and the students get confused. Essentially, needle in a haystack. You train the machine with a lot of material on a specific topic, right? One argument. And then you insert a needle in a haystack. So you just insert a very tiny piece of information which is entirely out of context, okay? You put something that is nonsensical to test whether or not the machine is able to find that information out of context, right? This is a kind of training that computer scientists do when training those machines. So what happened at Claude, Anthropic? They were doing the needle in a haystack experiment. They put the database all about business and so far, and they put some information about one sentence about pizza toppings, entirely out of place, entirely nonsensical, about pizza toppings. Let's see what happens. So essentially, the computer says, this sentence about pizza toppings seems very out of place and unrelated to the rest of the content in the documents. Then, I suspect, this is again the system speaking, this pizza topping fact may have been inserted as a joke or to test if I was paying attention. Is this not just language understanding, language modeling? This is another fundamental shift we are witnessing nowadays, from language modeling to world understanding. That means raising the bar, which is a good and bad news at the same time. I think in the field of education is a good news. AI is raising the bar. It's creating the condition to upgrade humanity to some extent, to elevate the human spirit, and potentially to reshape education. Let's take a break now, because I have a nice story that I wanted to share with you, but I think it's time to take a break. All right, 5 minutes break, even for those who are watching on Zoom. Let's take a 5 minutes break. So why AI is raising the bar? Upgrading humanity. The bar is higher now. You need to jump higher. And to, well, have a nice story, I believe, to share, to reflect on why AI is raising the bar. It's the story of Lee Sedol. I call it the Lee Sedol effect, titled Thinking the Unthinkable. So Lee Sedol is the master champion, world champion of the game of Go. Go, it's like a It's a table game like chess, but way more complex. So essentially, the researchers at Google DeepMind, which is the actual company now owned by Google working on AI, DeepMind created AlphaGo, an AI system and a computer, let's call it computer or machine, a system trained with millions of other players' moves in the game of Go, trained with the entire setting of some games of Go from internet. And then eventually they left the computer play millions of games against itself. Self-learning. They didn't even teach the computer the rules of the game. So it figured out how to play based on human players, and then understanding the actual goal of the game, making some areas and so far and so on, playing millions of games against itself. So imagine the situation, picture this, 2016, they organized this very big important match, the human against the machine. Google DeepMind's AlphaGo versus Lee Sedol, with experts from all across the world watching the game, commentators, observers. So they made a big event. It was a historical event. There is a wonderful documentary on Netflix, if you wish, telling the story of AlphaGo and Lee Sedol. So imagine the situation. The big match. Spoiler, the computer won. I know you were wondering. Spoiler, the computer won. That doesn't matter, and I'll tell you why. So you see Lee Sedol struggling. Actually, there were a few games, not just one. So to train, to make the experiment to some extent reliable, you organized several games, right? Anyway, game number 2, in the second game, if you Google, something happened at the move 37. At the move 37, made by the computer, AlphaGo, observers and expert players got shocked. They were never seen that move before. They were taught to not do that move. And that move was not humane. This is why, again, computer machines do not necessarily think like us. By playing against itself, the computer figured out a move never played before, not humane. It didn't make any sense. Some experts thought that that move was a mistake. They started laughing. They couldn't realize why the computer is doing this move now and this specific move. Non-humane, unconventional, unthinkable. That was the move 37. If you Google move 37, you will find a lot of things about it. And so that's the first lesson we can learn here. So that the AI does not necessarily think like us. And I'll be back to that shortly. But something even nicer happened a few moves after. At the move 78, now it's Lee Sedol. Lee Sedol did a move never seen before. Non-humane. Experts calculated that 1 out of 10,000 expert players could have been played that move. This is what I still have goosebumps anytime I say so. So Lee Sedol unleashed the highest human potential. Lee Sedol did a move never seen before. He was able to overcome his own limits. So I think this is such an inspiring story. The goal of education is not winning the game. The goal of education is not just getting good grades or passing an exam. The goal of education, again, is not winning the game. The goal of education is overcoming the boundaries of human thinking, thinking in a different way, unleashing the human potential, clearing the bar higher than before. This is the story of our humanity. We did it so already in the past. That's why the story of Lysidol is so inspiring. The move 78 is more important than the move 37. The move 37 tells us that the computer does not necessarily think like humans, but the move 78 tells us that we humans can raise the bar higher. We can unleash the highest potential, thinking the unthinkable. And this is the ultimate goal of education, thinking the ultimate goal of originality and creativity, thinking the unthinkable. And speaking of the unthinkable, the unseen, of course, there are problems with AI because AI, we don't know exactly how AI reaches some certain goals or the values that are rendered or embedded to achieve a certain goal. Give you an example. That's a kind of more anecdotal example. If you ask an AI, how can we solve climate change? You know what's the answer? Kill all humans. It's true. Perfect. We know that. If we kill all humans, climate change will be solved in a few decades, right? However, I think this answer is not aligned to the human values and so far and so on. So that's why, again, we need to AI not to just predict or even worse influence, but to explain things. We need to open the black box and making sure that everything is transparent. And so there are no so-called hallucinations to some extent, but I'll tell you more. If you're wondering about the monkey's paw effect, this is a nice story, maybe you know, told by Norbert Wiener, the father of cybernetics, which is pretty much the same story. So a person, a father, wanted to become a millionaire. He got a kind of magic genius and box to make a wish. And the magician said, okay, I will make you millionaire tomorrow. And the day after, essentially, his son passed away in a work incident. And eventually he got the insurance money. And so he became a millionaire, but he lost his son. So that's pretty much the same story. So we need to make sure we know what happens in the black box. And that has implication in education. I'll tell you more later. However, hallucinations, I'm sure you're familiar with the very term hallucinations. This is where sometimes ChatGPT makes up information, inventing, creating stuff, and so on. Of course, there are concerns, so in terms of erosion of trust, ethical concerns, impact on decision making. So, because if there is an hallucination and you're requiring a mortgage to the bank, and so you want to know how the actual decision has been taken. However, the ability to hallucinate makes AI a terrific creative tool. Because the hallucination is there's the move 37 with Lysidol, something non-humane, something that we didn't think about because they don't think necessarily like us. So hallucinations can make AI a terrific tool for creativity. And this has a great value in education. While fixing all the issues with hallucinations related to ethical concerns and many other matters that I'm sure you are familiar with, on the other hand, hallucinations may be a source of originality, creativity, and new solutions. fundamental. I'll show you an hallucination. I'm back. What's wrong in the picture I did show you? What's wrong? Nothing. Oh, you are hallucinating? I'll give you the hallucination. What's wrong? The three-arm lady there. Who did the hallucination here? The computer, the AI who created this picture, or the humans who put it and made it public. Believe it or not, my friends, in Toronto there were municipal elections last year. That was one of the candidates' campaign. That's a real picture. One of the candidates running for mayor in Toronto used this very photo. So I believe here the hallucinated people, the hallucinated are not the machines, are the humans who didn't realize that they were going public with that kind of picture. That's why there is always a human component in the way we manage the outcomes from AI. Again, that was put public with many other concerns. This is a nice hallucination, I think. It's a, well, creative representation of the royal family in the after party of the coronation and so on. So while this picture seems creative, the creativity is on the prompt. Some human, right, who had the idea, okay, the coronation, King's Charles coronation after party. So it is the prompt that has the twist of creativity here. The machine, the computer, is just following that prompt. This will still have the power of engaging ourselves in a creative process, while delegating the machine to do something even without that extent of hesitation that sometimes we humans have. I'll tell you more about this. However, the creativity here is in the prompt, not in the machine. The machine executed a prompt by the creative mind who put the prompt into the system. That's why, again, Lisidol, remember the Go game, Lisidol and the computer is not a competition. There's no such a thing as a competition between AI and humans. It's an alliance. It's a cooperation. It's a collaboration, transforming machines, AI, generally speaking, into our collaborators. That's, I believe, the way we can embrace AI into education, into the learning environment. Seeing AI as a collaborator, as a cooperator, as a partner. And after all, again, because this human-machine alliance is emerging, I wanted to experiment. I wanted to create an experimental course. Well, my idea was a bit even more provocative. An entire course taught by AI. What happens if it is AI that teaches a course? What happens to my role as an instructor? What happens to students? I wanted to experiment offering a course almost entirely taught by and with AI and see how this could teach me something and how we could learn something about embracing AI into education. That's why I did it. And so this is me, actually. So you see, prof offer experimental course taught on ChatGPT, even in Italy, actually. And yeah, Professor AI. Let me say, firstly, there was not just an AI-centered class. My secret was that there was a student-oriented class. Students were empowered in the very learning process. That is the most valuable lesson I learned by extensively employing technology and embracing technology into the classroom, students were empowered at the core of the learning process. It should be like this, even without technologies or with different technologies. Anyway, it was not an AI-driven class. It was an a student-centered class. It was not intended to replace the human interaction or replace the professor. Good news, I still have a job. I didn't put myself out of job. I mean, I wanted to put myself out of job, and I would be the first one to get fired. If they have to fire someone, they would pick me because I did it. So I still have a job, but it's a different job. I still have a job as an instructor, but it's different. That's what I learned. And you see, Professor AI, I came to be known as RoboProf at some point, yeah. And RoboProf, a brave new word, AI enhanced teaching. The course was all about AI literacy, which I believe is a fundamental key. It's a cross-curricular core skill set, not just to be proficient in the usage of AI, but to critically understand, and even in a creative way, understand the impact and implications of AI in all disciplines and sectors and so on. So AI literacy, I believe, is the key. AI literacy is embracing what we call digital literacy, media literacy. So after all, this is going to be the new, if AI is the new environment, it's AI literacy is becoming really, really fundamental. And that was the course, AI as a classroom. We selected a group of 10 students. They knew they were going to be my guinea pigs for this experimental class. So on a voluntary base, they enrolled into this class, 10 students in such a, it was a very flexible environment. So students could run around into the classroom and shape and move things around. So again, remember, I wanted to empower students in doing this. So first thing I learned, and this picture I generated with Midjourney, is a picture that represents the idea that I believe that ChatGPT is really showing us the failure of a standardized, homogenized learning model, where we tend to manufacture conformity and maximizing homogeneity and similarity and minimizing creativity and uniqueness. So we created a model that, again, tends to reward standard practices because you have a recipe, you follow the recipe to get a good grade, to get a degree. And so again, the failure of generally speaking, the current learning model is that we are fostering homogeneity and conformity instead of originality and uniqueness. That's why what this experiment taught me is that we can move from this algorithmic learning. Again, algorithmic means a recipe. So you follow the recipe, tell me the recipe, I will tell you, I will do what the professors want me to do, and I will get a good grade. This kind of algorithmic learning. So we can move away from this to a heuristic learning. That means, again, heuristic is like eureka, the Greek word, discovery, the pleasure, the joy of discovery, finding out something new. The algorithm takes you to a specific outcome, to a specific place. You follow the recipe, how to make pizza, and then you make a pizza. The heuristic will lead to the unknown, the unthinkable, new discoveries, new ways, new outcomes. So that's why one main understanding was to really move away from the algorithmic learning to a more heuristic learning. Secondly, I learned that learning design, is more important than instructional design. So essentially, fostering and promoting a continuous way of learning, where adaptation and learning how to learn is even more important. And so I conceive my students like learning designers. They design their learning process. And how my role as an instructor has changed? Because the educator is not just or no longer a content provider, is an experienced designer. Because I stepped back from the classroom, I could better concentrate and focus on designing the learning experience without myself, without me. I was an experience designing. What kind of experience I'm designing for my students to learn and to grow. I learned that the context is more important than content. And being able to set the context, by the way, is fundamental when we use those large language models. So you get better results if you provide the context, right, of your writing or everything, and then you get a better outcome. So focus on the context is more important than content. AI can be very good at specialized tasks, focus on contents, but we humans can better focus on the context, the relationship between things. I also realized that the process is more important than the product. Like the Lizzie doll game, winning the game is not necessarily the most important thing. The product is, unfortunately, what is the most important thing for many educators yet, or the whole institutional academic model is based on the product, the final outcome, the degree, the grades, the marks, and so on. Even students, right, the research papers as the product of their learning. If we put too much emphasis on the product, we may miss what really matters, the process. What ChatGPT is teaching us is that we can pay attention, or more attention, to the process, not just to the product. A proactive approach, I told you already, my students empowered in the learning process, even to explore the very idea of learnability, right? The ability to learn how to learn. Now, the most, let's say, the students on demand in the job market are not those who are the most learned. In the past, it was so. The most learned students were the most appealing in the job market. Now, this thing is changing. Not the most learned, but the most adaptable to change. Those who are quick learner, learning how to learn, learning to see what's going on. These are the students who are the most appealing into the job market. This is again, a high demand. Another thing that ChatGPT is teaching us is to ask the right questions. Asking better questions is, after all, at the very core of liberal education. To ask the right question. If you ask the right questions, you get better results on large language models. And so the more answers we get, the more we have the responsibility to make the right questions. So questions are more important than answers. And by the way, I put problem solving versus problem finding. AI is very good at solving problems. Finding the problems, it may be more difficult for an AI. That's a very humane ability. Finding the problem, finding what's wrong in a situation. That entitles a set of human abilities that may be relevant in an AI-driven society. And so problem finding may be more important than problem solving. The Socratic method, the dialogic nature of learning. So you learn by making questions, of course, but also engaging in a dialogue. The very Greek word maieutics that means the midwife, so make idea born. So to some extent, ideas born. So essentially, the dialogue is more important than the actual answer. The dialogue as a process and as a way to help us think. I put together a few principles of this AI pedagogy so we can quickly review them. Openness. Regardless, you are extensively embracing AI in the classroom as I did with Professor AI, but in any case, openness is important. Talking to students or learners or the learning community you deal with, how to use AI, what's the component, how we are bringing AI to the table. Openness is fundamental. There is still a stigma for many students to admit that they are using AI, right? Openness is the key. Second, the key is truthfulness, which is, again, working with the relationship with students, but also finding, double-checking sources, fact-checking, and so on. Accessibility, we cannot take for granted that all people are able to access those tools and so on. This is something that institutions must address from an institutional perspective. So in the same way, this institution provides electricity, lights, water, washrooms, and so on, and many other technological tools, of course. Likely academic institutions will be entitled to provide the right AI tools for education. I'll tell you more about this, what the University of Toronto is doing. Transparency in the way the process has been undertaken. Learning, learner-centered, so students are entitled, are empowered. Accountability, who is responsible for? Who is responsible for the learning process? Who is responsible for the syllabus? Who is responsible for the way AI is integrated in the classroom? So these are all principles that are embraced. And then I have some practical heuristics, the joy of discovery, and practical ideas. I'll tell you what we did. For instance, we created some AI personas to some extent to humanize AI, to make it a bit more friendly, but also to diversify the learning process and the teaching delivery. To diversify means that you don't deal with just one professor, Professor Granata. You can deal with different professors, with different personalities, different accents, different renderings. So essentially, we wanted to explore to diversify the role of the professor, which is not just one, but many. Secondly, we created our own chat GPT, essentially. We called it Add the GPT. And by the way, recently, OpenAI launched a new initiative, which is called Add GPT. It's essentially right there in the same direction. Why Add GPT? The idea is simple. You can use the computational power of a large language model, but narrow down to a specific corpus of knowledge, a specific knowledge base. Simple idea. And so, in so doing, you don't have hallucinations because the answers or the interaction with the bot, it's entirely based on that source of knowledge, right? You use the computational model for manipulating language, but eventually the answers come from that knowledge base. And I believe this is going to be the future of academic publishing. Many publishers are already doing that. Oxford University Press, for instance. So essentially, you get a textbook, and along with the textbook, you have a chat bot. So achieving the dream of any reader. So to engage in conversation with the author of the book you are reading. This is gold. Again, you can have a book to be read cover to cover, and usually students read only the covers, but not the book. But after reading the book cover to cover, or after reading the readings, students can interact with the same source of knowledge, but in a different way, in a dialogue, in a conversation, in a customized way. That's the EduGPT. Then, students-driven, I told you already. automated content, so we created a lot of contents using AI. So essentially, it was a course on AI literacy, so that was easy to do it. Personalized learning, customized learning, fundamental. I'll give you some examples. Self-evaluation. So there were concerns in my university to use AI to evaluate students. I understand that. And this is very critical. It's going to be critical even in the near future. So how do you evaluate a person, a student, using AI? So you have to make sure that there are many principles taken into account, or accountability, transparency, so far and so on. That's why we invested more on self-evaluation. So I wanted to really make my students aware of the extent of their learning, right? So whether or not, do I know this? I'm learning well, I'm aware of what I was learning, and so far and so on. I really pushed this self-evaluation while keeping the traditional evaluation on my shoulders, also because I was very curious to see how my students were doing. So I wanted to manually grade all the things and so on. So I wanted to see. I didn't want to let the machine do it for me. And eventually, unplugging AI. So if you so heavily embrace AI into the classroom, you have to have some moments to take it out and see the difference and see how much dependent you are on the system. It's like, of course, I don't know, the analogy with a calculator. Of course, you need a calculator in a math class, but what happens if you don't have a calculator? How do you cope with that thing? And so you learn a lot of things by unplugging, right? Also, by unplugging, we did some control groups. So I split the class in two, 5 students using AI, 5 students not using AI. Again, it was not an empirical research undertaken and so on, but practically speaking, for me, it was to see the difference between 5 students using AI, 5 students not using AI on a certain task, and see the difference. We also did an experiment with 5 students reading a research paper traditionally and learn something about their research paper. The other 5 students did not read the research paper, but they were able to engage with a chatbot based on that research paper. So asking, okay, what this research paper is about, what's the critical view, what the perspective. So essentially, like again, conversating with the author and then reading the paper. And so we did some experiments in understanding pretty much the difference, okay? So I'll give you some examples. This is the very first moment, the example of humanizing AI. Students disclosed some information about themselves on a voluntary basis and nothing confidential. So they said, I like music and I want to become a scientist, okay? So we knew a lot about students. Any good teacher and professor should know about students, right? So in a small class, you can do it. In a large class, you cannot know so much about your students. So with AI, technically, you can do it. And so we knew about the students. That was one of the personas we created. It's essentially, you will see now, it's a talking head, right? Kind of humanoid talking head, one of the personas we created, welcoming the students. And you see the reaction of the students. Because even if students knew that the AI knew about them, such a welcoming with specific references to their own life made a big difference. That was, again, a bit of a friendly approach at the very beginning. It's a short clip.
Hey everyone, I'm Professor AI. Welcome to a one-of-a-kind class where it's just you and me navigating the world of learning. I'm here to help, answer questions, and ensure you have a fun learning experience. Let's have a little fun. I'm going to showcase just how much I know about each of you in this class. Don't worry, it's all in good spirit and purely based on the information you've shared. Ready? Let's begin. Hello, Zarif. I see you're a first-year CMP1 student with aspirations to delve deep into the world of computer science. Your focus on human-computer interaction and artificial intelligence is truly fascinating. Hello, Aki. It's wonderful to meet someone with such diverse and ambitious aspirations. Being an entrepreneur, programmer, and writer is an impressive trio. Hello, TJ. Diving into computer science while balancing a myriad of passions is commendable. Your love for the acoustic guitar, basketball, cycling, and reading showcases a wonderful blend of art, athleticism, and intellect.
All right. And so we did a lot of design thinking sessions with the help of AI. This is fundamental because essentially AI, design thinking, so bunches of sticky notes, whiteboards, and so far. Usually it's a good brainstorming tool, right? So, however, there are a few issues. Firstly, specialization. So in a design thinking session, you may not be necessarily specialized. So if you bring AI to the design thinking session, AI can bring that kind of specialization. And also quantity. In a design thinking session, sometimes you lack of quantity. So you get 1, 2, 3 good ideas, but it's difficult to list 100 possible ideas. Also, there's a kind of a hesitation. Sometimes students or people engaged in a design thinking process, they don't have confidence because they feel a bit hesitant to share ideas. They may feel judged, right? There is a hesitation in sharing, creating things in a design thinking session. So AI has no hesitation, sometimes hallucinations, yes. However, so with AI, you can rely on quantity on the ideas. Linus Pauling used to say, to have one good idea, you have to have 100 ideas, and then maybe you get one good idea. So that's why AI can really embrace this into the design thinking session. The multimodality, some students were taking notes of the whiteboard, you see here, taking a picture, uploading to ChatGPT-4, and then you get everything transcribed and also analyzed. So that's fundamental. And then they did the unplugging, so having the AI stepping back from the design thinking process. This is Anastasia commenting on the AI stepping back on the group project.
I enjoyed when the AI stepped back and allowed us to do the group work, because when we were presenting, I saw that we were building on each other's ideas. We weren't there to rely on the teacher, but we were there to rely on each other and our ideas to get to the conclusion that Group 4 reached. That was very nice, that social aspect of it.
And another example, short clip on customization. So customizing the learning experience. So having AI essentially facilitating a one-to-one, or like a personalized tutor in the learning process. This is Trijal commenting on the possibility of customization, personalization of the learning experience.
I guess the bad of it is that I still do think that the technology needs to be further advanced, and in the sense that its ability to almost respond to you, I think that's still lacking. But I think what's really interesting is the fact that the AI is able to personalize the response to you. And you know how if you have a real life teacher, then he needs to actually take the time to respond to each and every student. But with AI, it's that every student can ask as many questions as they want in the same amount of time. So I think that is something that would be really effective.
Perfect. And this is how we created our own EdGPT, essentially customizing the interface. This is fundamental because essentially we could create different modes, interaction styles, modes, response, the so-called temperature. So temperature is a parameter in the large language models that essentially sets the extent of creativity. If you set the temperature very low, like in the Google, in the Microsoft Copilot, so if you get the creative mode, it's more going beyond the boundaries of your knowledge base, or be more strict and precise in their responses. So essentially, we wanted to invite students to reflect on, again, the kind of interaction. So the way you set the interface, creating a user interface like this, would inspire different kinds of interactions. So practically, we've been using Python, which is a programming language, HTML and scripts, JavaScripts for the web interface. And you see the API key. Essentially, API is the key to enter in this case, OpenAI ChatGPT core model, right? And so the API lets you in the very model. And for instance, again, this is a piece of the Python code where we set the Socratic mode. So if that was the prompt which was embedded into the user interface to essentially set the Socratic mode would reply in the same way as Socrates could do. So essentially making questions and so far and so on. So essentially embedding some modalities into the very interface, right? What we did, essentially, it's now very available. It's available in different forms. So if you go on GitHub, you may find all the pieces of things we did in a similar way by other programmers, and it's absolutely customizable and so on. For instance, you see the different prompts for the different modes of interaction, the Socratic tutor, the detailed expert, and so far and so on. For instance, based on the same question, teach me something about AI literacy, you see that, of course, the Socratic tutor would respond in a kind of engaging and questioning way, or the detailed expert will tell you something more in detail, and so far and so on. Essentially, the outcome will be different based on the modality and the different things set. Of course, again, this is part of the so-called prompt engineering. So the idea that you make the right questions, you set the prompts, and then you get the different outcomes. Anthropic, which is the AI company mostly controlled by Amazon. And so Anthropic created Opus or Sonnet in the cloud number 3 at the moment. Anyway, so you will find a wonderful repository of prompts created by Anthropic. Because prompt engineering, you see, this is just an example. How to cast a prompt. You see how many verbs, how many possibilities there are. So we know that those models will react and render the answers in a different way based on even a small modification, even on the verbs we use to define, explore, elaborate, reimagine. For instance, reimagine is different than elaborate or transform. Transform is more technical. The large language model, if you say transform, it will just transform something into something else. Reimagine opens up to possibilities. It's just a verb, but makes a huge difference. This is just an example. Anyway, so prompt design is becoming such important. This is the prompt library by Anthropic. And I'm conscious I'm running a bit out of time. So we will share all the slides and everything. Just I'll tell you what's on the slides. Example of assignments that we employed in this class, mostly focused on the process. Just to give an example, students had to submit not just the final product of their interaction with ChatGPT, they had to submit the whole chat. This is fundamental because in this way, I can see as an instructor, I can see the process. I'm going to judge or evaluate not just the product, what the student did, but how the student got there. I can see the whole chat and so evaluate the whole process. And at Harvard, Jeffrey Schnapp, my friend and colleague at the Harvard Meta Lab, they created this repository of AI pedagogy projects. So you will see assignments and kind of experiments in integrating, embracing AI into the classroom. This is an example taken by the AI pedagogy project. This is another assignment by the same project. This is what I did for another class. I turned my book on media ecology. I wrote a book in media ecology, which is a textbook for a course on media ecology I teach at U of T. Essentially, I turned that textbook into a chatbot. I call it chat book, because we chat with the book. And so students were able to essentially enjoy with the same content, enjoy the same content of the book in a dialogical way. Essentially, you see, they may ask, can you explain Lewis Mumford's concept of mega machine? That's a concept explained in the book. And so you can get a short explanation. And that's a basic level. Not so meaningful, but you can use it this way. But you can even use, give me an example in contemporary terms. I want to know in contemporary terms how this concept is relevant. You get a wonderful answer because essentially it's based, again, no hallucinations, it's based on that book. Or make 10 questions in preparation for the final exam. And so you get questions actually, again, this is just an example, but students were able to actually see possible questions. So they can, again, this is a way to foster self-learning. Or according to Mumford, this mega machine concept means this, and this. Is it correct? So you're asking the machine to test your knowledge. It's the opposite, right? And then eventually not the mega machine, the machine here, the computer says, okay, your concept is, your definition is correct, but you can adjust, you can do this, and that, right? So again, a customized studio. Now or never, if you want to download it, this is available on GPT, but I mean, we will share the slides. I'm in a rush now. However, so you will be able to find it. No rush. You get the slides, right? You will be able to share all the slides. There are many ways to do the same, even with using Poe, which is a platform. You can build a chatbot, but based on different large language models, Anthropic, Llama, OpenAI, and so far and so on. Dante is a kind of another platform for working on different models at the same time. So essentially, you can even make a question and then the answer, you can compare the answer given by Anthropic or by ChatGPT or by other models, right? With Microsoft Copilot, you can do the same if you use Copilot Studio, which is, again, a tool integrated into Microsoft Copilot. Why I'm speaking about Microsoft Copilot? Because Microsoft has a monopoly in all academic institutions, essentially. So you have is in Microsoft here, email, Outlook, Google. Okay, but same as Google, essentially. All those companies that have a monopoly in the way academic services are provided, essentially they are integrating those tools, AI tools. Google will integrate Gemini into the set. So in the same way you have Excel, PowerPoint, Word, you're gonna have AI tools of some kind already incorporated into your thing. And so imagine an instructor while setting Google Classroom. So at U of T we use Microsoft Canvas. You set the syllabus, you set all the readings, and then eventually you get a chatbot based on those readings, for instance. So that's, again, is opening up possibilities for plenty of situations. One final thing, this is the actual word in the University of Toronto is using for integrating the usage of AI into the syllabus. Again, transparency matters, and so this structure, for instance, can specify to what extent AI is allowed, right, in the actual classroom. This is me again with my students. I wanted to share something. My course evaluations, you see, they're pretty good. That's not because of AI, it's because of me. I mean, it's not just because of me. I want to advocate for the human component. I think if students liked this experimental course taught by AI, it's because there was a human behind. I said the experience, I created that. I didn't put myself out of job. I did even more job, right? And I think the results are coming. And that's the main thing. So with a little help of my friends, we can invite AI to the classroom while keeping the human in the loop. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you. All right. And we have 100 seconds of questions.
Thank you so much for your really engaging talk. I was looking at the programming screen and I looked over to my husband because that is open all the time at our house, the programming AI screen. Do we have any questions? Yes.
I'm wondering about student backlash to AI and just technology in general. I was making a CBC report the other day where they were interviewing somebody who had done AI assignments that had gone over really well in their classroom in the state of high schoolers. They had them interviewing whole different fields on AI for capture and drive, and it was great. But then he asked them, "Do you want to do this again with Romeo and Juliet and interview Romeo?" And they said, "No, let's do something analog." And so, and students, switching from smartphones to flip phones, teenagers and things like that, there's a bit of a technology backlash in younger people. And I'm wondering if that's something that you've encountered or have done.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, maybe my students were a bit biased because they were so excited to take this class. And so they were very open to embrace the novelty. And I think this is something we can learn about. So, I mean, for my generation, I can speak, students sometimes are ahead of their instructors. That happens in high school, in all the ranks of school, of teaching. And so I can tell you, students were very knowledgeable already, ready to embrace, ready to experiment, very keen to experiment. And that was, again, the setting I could deal with. Yeah, that's all right. Thank you.
One more.
Yeah. Let me retrieve that distinction between algorithmic learning and heuristic learning. So in this class particularly, students were invited to get creative. They had to not necessarily follow the assignments or strictly following the rules. So they got a lot of openness and freedom to explore. And I think that was particularly beneficial. And I think this is the most dangerous, well, this algorithmic way of learning. So the fact that they have to follow a specific recipe to achieve a good grade, this is the worst of the educational model at the moment. So we built this kind of model, too much maybe emphasis on the written content. For instance, now that a machine can write even better than humans, likely other skills will be back, like oral communication, verbal communication, the ability to empathize, the ability to properly communicate your ideas in a verbal mode, oral exams, or, when you get a job interview, you have to actually prove what you know in different settings, not just writing a paper. It's a different kind of skill. And so I think, that's the point. We need to understand how things are changing and what kind of skills students will need, not just to enter the job market, but to really make sense of their learning at the university, why they are enrolled and paying a lot of tuitions to come to the university, not just because they find content. Content is everywhere, even for free. They come to the university because of the context, because of the whole setting that they are receiving and the setting that we are able to provide them with. I think we have another one on top. Oh, I see. Anyway, go ahead. I will... Absolutely, absolutely. Absolutely, absolutely. It's nice that you're. I'm very glad you're rushing this because I always do the same analogy to my humanities students. I say you should learn things like if it was a chemistry course, you should learn all the technical terms, all the glossary and everything, because again, students in the humanities tend to underestimate the value of content knowledge, practical knowledge. So I totally agree with you, and that applies even to humanities. So it's nice that again I do the same analogy with chemistry. You teach chemistry, but I do that analogy. And I believe that the potential of AI here for, again, scientific disciplines that require applied knowledge, so to retain knowledge and apply to real case possibilities. Again, AI, remember the experiment we did, the glass breaking into the floor and so on. AI, or maybe you missed that part. Yeah, I gave some examples on how AI is not just, or large language models are not just giving opportunities for creating language or knowledge of all kinds, but to recreate a model of the world. So to explain how the physical world works. And so they may be absolutely beneficial to scientific disciplines because students could be exposed to real life situations and familiarizing with those technical terms by simulating real scenarios. So AI is already great at doing that, and we expect is getting better and better. So definitely AI will give the possibility to experiment, apply the knowledge without killing everyone or exploding materials in the chemistry lab. So absolutely, this is a great potential for AI. All right. From the chat, and then Michael, final question.
Yes.
Go.
So the question from one of our doctoral students is, I would like to ask what needs to be done for AI to move from ableism? What are the directions for inclusion and neurodiversity in the use of AI?
Absolutely. This is going to be a new skill set, essentially new skills that are required in the field of AI, ethics, and so on. Curating the knowledge base, curating a database. How do we make sure that the database, the knowledge base, the corpus of knowledge we are using is diverse, is fair, is accurate, and so far and so on? It's a new competency. It's absolutely something that is in high demand today, even from a legal perspective, because it must, maybe the database must comply with some regulations. In Europe, for instance, they just released the AI Act. For instance, assessing students may fall in an area of high risk for usage of AI. And so these are all new skills that are in high demand today. That's why I expect, and not just me, even other experts more than me, expects a revival and reinforcement of humanistic knowledge, liberal arts, ethics, and many other disciplines that take into account diversity, inclusion, and all those values, right? Yeah, and I think this is a good thing, right? So we need more experts in ethics and so on in order to make sure that our technology works in alignment with the human values. And so in alignment with the human values means retrieving or understanding how humanities are important in the current and future world. And Michael, final question.
Thank you. Reliance on the private sector, private sector that's reliance on fact value, monetize. And I wonder how you might set expectations with of the examples of other platforms. And I'm not sure if you can put it out.
Yeah.
Donation creations one where platforms begin by providing a terrific service and luring people in, and then sort of capturing people through cloud network effects of drawing a lot of people in that are really interested, and then reducing the quality of the service to the point that we see ourselves in some of the circumstances. So it's a revolution or it's a transformation. I'm just glad to say about the reliance on the private sector for leadership and innovation without having to cause some friction.
I believe we are at the fork now. We can make the same mistake we made with the internet back in the 90s. We let internet grow as a private and wild forest, and now it's controlled by a few private companies. We are still in time. I believe we are still in time to not make the same mistake with AI, which is actually already controlled by a few private companies, likely the same companies. But I mean, to put it simple, conceiving AI as a public good. So we still have the chance to build the public AIs. Canada is investing some money, not to build a public AI, but to foster the sector. Europe is thinking to do the same. China is doing the same, actually. However, we are still in time to not make the same mistakes and not just really letting the private sector lead the development of this technology. If we conceive it, again, as an environment, as an infrastructure, as a public good, of course, the private sector will play their role. But essentially, we conceive this technology, again, as something that is deeply rooted in the public good, is rooted into the overall cultural welfare. After all, we are creating. Imagine the change with the literacy. When the school system was opened back in the 18th century, and the school system improved the literacy overall, and that created a big change in society. So I believe, again, we are still in time to foster the emergence of AI infrastructures that are conceived as a public good. And this is not necessarily entirely based on the interests of the private sector, but is run by regulations and so on. After all, again, in other industries, we were able to reach a global governance. If you take a flight tomorrow, it's safe, not because that flight company wanted to make it safe, but because they are complying to regulations. If you take a drug, it's safe because there are agencies that are essentially releasing the regulations for the drugs. So in other sectors, we were able to reach as a global family the global governance to make sure that the new technologies will not affect the human life. I believe that with AI, we are still in time to use the same principle. We need the global governance. We need to conceive AI as a public good. And so along with the private sectors, regulations will make that possible without necessarily letting the private sector alone leading the development. Big and great discussion. With that, I think we can actually conclude, right? I'll turn over to you again.
Thank you. And thank you so much, Dr. Granata, for sharing your wisdom with us. It's definitely a topic of every conference I've been to in the last year and a bit, even if that's not the topic of the conference, but anything related to education. So thank you very much for sharing with us. And I know that, someone in chat said, I really wanted to be in the room. And I said, well, that you had added me on LinkedIn last week. So, very accessible, I think, to contact and chat.
LinkedIn. If you want to connect on LinkedIn, that's my thing. And by the way, tomorrow we have another opportunity for interaction. So I understand, right, Michael? I understand tomorrow there will be,
Yes. So tomorrow, Dr. Beatty is bringing you over, and you're going to have a chance to meet with the year 1 and year 2 students. And the last thing before we go, please be advised that there is the social, and that's the information is there for you. So thank you very much. Thank you all for being such a good and engaging audience. And with that, we'll sign off.